Hi, I'm Stella Wang. I'm the CEO of Dazzle Rocks, and you're listening to the Tomorrow with the Rovio podcast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Tomorrow with Rovio podcast. I'm your host, Ben Mattis. In today's episode, we talk to Stella Wang. She's the CEO and founder of a Finnish mobile developer called Dazzle Rocks, ex-Rovio, which is kind of neat. They're developing a game called Dazzle Rocks that's a female-friendly, mobile-first social sandbox MMO. In this interview, we talk with Stella about how her team and she think about trends, the trends that are on the rise, that are ascending in mobile and in gaming in general, how they use those trends to help set and define the strategy for their product and for their company. We talk about social gaming, the rise of social gaming in the sort of MMO era, the sort of maybe fall of social gaming and maybe the ascension of social networks, and perhaps now the even faster ascension of these persistent social worlds and why this next generation of social MMO games represents such a huge opportunity in terms of gaming and in terms of entertainment and perhaps in terms of society as a whole. It was a fascinating interview. I learned a ton. I hope you dig it. Hi, Stella. Nice
Hi.
to talk to you again. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Nice to meet you. I still love your wall color, and there's another fox in behind you. Yes.
It's funny. Some people laugh at the wall color. They think it's like totally horrible, and some people love it.
They don't have taste. They don't understand.
They have no taste. There we go.
They don't have taste.
I'm trying to mix it up a little bit with a little bit more light, a little bit more color. I don't know. We'll see.
Almost feel like going to the spa, so it's good vibe.
Yeah, it's very zen. That's right. Yeah. I actually made this. I made that years ago back when I used to do some woodworking. So it's like the one thing that I kept from that previous life.
Okay, so I hope no one criticized that light.
Yeah, there we go. Don't say mean things about my furniture making. Well, can you start by introducing yourself? Maybe explain a little bit about your career trajectory. Obviously, there's an interesting Rovio overlap there. Yeah. And then maybe talk a little bit about kind of Dazzle Rocks and what made you start it and that kind of stuff.
Well, now when I think about it, it has been 10 years I've been in the game industry. It's time really fly. And actually, really before the coming to Rovio, my time was actually in advertising. I was working in New York City beforehand. So a long story short, so I joined Rovio when Rovio was around 50 to 100 people. So I remember the moment I signed, there was like 50, but the day I joined, because I waited for my visa, I think it was around 100 people.
Wow, it was a fast-growing company.
Really fast-growing. I think it was 2011 at that time. So I basically stayed there for like 3 years, and we were running like an R&D. So basically, the concept at that time, because at that time the whole Apple's ecosystem just started 2008. So a lot of game companies trying to figure out what they want to do, and Rovio was all of a sudden kind of the Angry Bird take off quite tremendous, and there's still a lot of untapped opportunity. Like, how do you play the game on the iPad, play the game with a TV, a location based? So basically, our team was doing a lot of innovations, thinking about the untapped opportunity and doing from, basically, we always like to call 0 to 1, like start from nothing and doing something, and also take that to the market. So our experience in Rovio was really interesting. So we were growing with the company. So at that time, I probably grow also with a zero legal team to their some legal, like a big legal team. So we were on the negotiation table, R&D, and also quite many different fronts. So Jonas and I was a PM, product manager. Jonas was a tech and project lead.
Great.
So that's where we met.
And Jonas, he's a co-founder of
He's
Dazzle
my
Rocks?
co-founder. Yeah,
okay,
he's
excellent.
my co-founder. And it was interesting because he left a bit earlier than me in Rovio. So after he left, he actually showed me a prototype when I was still in Rovio. We are quite an entrepreneur mindset. So the reason we joined Rovio was we were pitching to Rovio at that time that for some project. And they said that if you want to be entrepreneur, why don't be an entrepreneur in-house? So that's how we joined at that time. And when we started when Jonas left, he actually showed me a prototype. And it was really interesting of the runner game. And at that time, Cookie Run was very popular, like years ago. Now you know, many years ago. So he showed like a procedure generated with a very ugly box, and the eyes is poking outside the box. So I was joking with him, this looks so ugly. Then that's start a company we never did. So that's where we started. And when we started, there was a kind of thinking behind that we want to look into the untapped area. I think that has always been our ambitious, and that's also been our kind of a strength, looking at what's in the future. And we feel that it's much more fun to puzzling what happened in the future.
Sure.
So at that time, there were actually 3 prototypes in our starting game. So we did one procedure generated runner, and then later on, there was one game very similar to a simplified version of Animal Crossing. And then that we called that kind of like social MMO at that time. But a little bit history. So as a company right now, our statement is social sandbox for social generations. So we want to tackle what's a social MMO in the sandbox world, but we also want to make sure that we are tagging into the social generations.
Right.
So that's basically like our vision statement when we work on the project. Yeah.
That's cool. And how do you define social generation?
This is a very interesting topic. We actually did a workshop. And then, our team is probably like a 90, 80 something, 90, end of 1970 something, 80 something, also 1990. We recently have a 2000. I start to feel getting older when I see application for 2000. Yeah,
you've got some babies with you.
Yes. So the interesting thing, if you ask what's social generation, most people would deny I'm not a social person. Especially if you ask in Scandinavia. But if you ask about what do they do on Discord, what do they do on Instagram, what do they do on TikTok, they're definitely on the social generation. So the way we define social generation is the generation that grow through, for example, my team thing, I'm a Facebook user, I'm like old generation. So growing through the Facebook time where you network with your friends, and then you also gradually network with the massive market, getting information from the outside world and also interact with other people. We do see a lot of that behavior considered to be a social generation. So
interesting. So in terms of ages, it's kind of like the millennial Gen Z probably. Like there's probably a strong over-indexing there.
Yeah, but also on the other hand, you will find a lot of different countries, like a 40-year-old, 50-year-old mom are very social. If you look at YouTuber, look at the like a Snapchat, it's different age group. So I think social generation is a behavior who is actually very adapted to this kind of network and social network applications. Yep. So I do see it's more behavior rather than the age and gender.
I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
It's the generation that's not defined by age, but instead defined by sort of behaviors and usage patterns.
Yes, definitely. And I think that it's too hard to define a behavior in the age group because now the internet are everywhere. It's more how adaptive you are to that sector. Yeah.
So Dazzle Rocks is 5 or 6 years old as a company. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
And you raised some money last year or 2 years ago?
Yes, right? 2020. Yes.
2020.
Actually, we raised on a really romantic day, February 14th.
Oh,
last
lovely.
year.
That's my son's birthday.
Okay, perfect. Yes.
It's an important day.
Yes, very important day. Yeah.
And so can you just talk a little bit about your thoughts regarding the role of VC versus the typical old school publisher, right? And is there a sort of rise in VC funded games, and maybe do you see a sort of maybe fall in publisher backed games? Is there a shift in terms of funding away from publishers towards VCs? Is there a particular type of game that maybe is more VC friendly? As someone who went through the process of choosing VC backing rather than a publisher partnership, I'm curious your thoughts about kind of why you took that path.
Well, I think I think there's three factors. One is actually the timeline, a period. For example, the past 1 year, we have seen the most acquisition in game industry and most like investments. But I remember when we closed the early round in 2015, our first investor, Initial Capital, told us that we are half year and 1 year late, because that time the VC market was very like a low point at that time to invest in games.
Absolutely.
So definitely it kind of tied into the wave of the industry. And I do think the pandemic bring a lot of kind of new generation, and also Fortnite, Roblox gave a lot of new thoughts what the future could be. But in terms of choosing like a publisher or like a VC, I think there's few perspective, and it might be subjective, but this is my personal view. I do think traditional publisher, they need to have a predictive model of how this game is going to perform. Basically, they will look at the top chart and their experience to actually find the right game. So taking the risk of doing something a little bit blue ocean, a little bit different, is not the typical forte for a publisher. In terms, for example, when we 2.5 years ago, when we pitched social MMO, it was a very new concept for a lot of people. Most people think that MMO on mobile doesn't work. But when Fortnite happened, it has changed a lot of perspective. So I do think publisher, their business model is actually able to predict their investment on user acquisition. So they do need to have a predicted like LTV model to actually quantify. But VC can take more risk, and also VC is looking for the untapped opportunity. Not all the VC is doing that, but basically that's kind of generalized view of that.
Great.
And
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think that makes a lot of sense. Just use an acronym in there, use LTV, just so everyone knows lifetime value, right? That's what, yeah. The number of acronyms that get dropped on this podcast are just insane. So every time I hear an acronym, I want to try and just, make it concrete, because we'll probably use it multiple times moving forward.
But I want to add one more thing about the VC and also publisher. I do think the way your team structure will be very different.
Okay.
I think that when you're a publisher structured team, you need to have a lot more external bound, because there's a lot of integration to some publisher require you to integrate to their UA platform.
Of course.
So I do think the structure of the team would be quite a different type of
That's
team.
a great point. Yeah. That's a great point. Yeah. Okay. So you guys are mobile focused, mobile first.
We're mobile first.
You've been in mobile for almost 10 years, right?
Yes.
Can you talk about your perception of how the mobile gaming space has evolved over the last decade, right? We go back 10 years ago, it's more or less the launch of Angry Birds. It's kind of, in some ways, the birth of touchscreen gaming. And a lot has evolved in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
What do you think are the kind of like the major changes that caught your attention, and the major things that have shifted?
I think there's three things, and that's also where our strategic pillar is following. So one of the first thing is East and West. The second thing is female friendly. The third one is actually social. So if we think from the East and West, I think a lot of top crossing game right now, they also adopt certain version from Japanese game or Chinese games. A lot of the Asian games also adopt the Western game. We see a lot of adaptation in the past few years, and we see things are influenced, especially the meta game loop, especially the user experiences influencing each other. So I think definitely that 10 years ago used to be a very unique, specific market. Like I usually talk to my ex-colleague in Rovio that Asia is not one continent, it's lots of different countries. East Asia also have different forte. So basically, I do see now you see more convergence, more fluent to the market, still really country specific, but a lot more adaptation, people learning from each other. And I think the second point is more about the female gamer. I remember many years ago, there's one discussion that if you ask a female if you're a gamer, they would always say, no, we're not.
That's right.
But another time they invest in Candy Crush's simulation title is insane. But the gamer interpretation is very different from the legacy term. So basically what happened is I do think female gamers a lot more, both on the return user and also spending user, a quite big market for. And the interesting is not many games are tailor-made for female friendly. So I think that's still the opportunity could grow. The third one is actually social gaming. I think years ago, social gaming meaning that you connect with the Facebook. You have this ranking system, you have the guilds, and you have this kind of react actions. But actually, this couple of years of social gaming is like why people talk about Metaverse. It's a whole universe of how you actually interact and socialize. You build a kind of a second life on the mobile space or on different consoles. So I do think social sector is also growing a lot. And then there will be a lot of recipe underneath the social sector.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, so you might have sort of already answered this next question. I'm gonna ask it anyways, and if it doesn't bear fruit, maybe we just cut it. But let's see.
Yeah.
So you obviously have a vision for how you think those three trends are going to converge.
Yeah.
It's the product you're building and the company that you're running. Can you try and paint a picture for what you think it's going to feel like to be a gamer in 3 to 5 years? So what kinds of things am I going to be playing? How is my gaming time going to be different in 3 to 5 years because of either the trends you've just highlighted or other, ascending trends?
Well, that's a tough question, but I was trying to decode it. You're asking a really good question here. So I do think that one of the key thing oriented for what we do, so our company is a social sandbox. So we're not doing like RPG kind of MMO. We're doing more a sandbox MMO. So what we are presenting, the opportunity here is actually the open world that people can build and socialize together. So basically, the reason we're starting from mobile, because most of the sandbox MMO, they're starting from PC or console.
Right.
So the kind of approach to the market is much more massive and also female friendly. So the idea is that people spend a little bit less time to think about how to do the coding, how to do kind of scripting to be the sandbox, like figure things out, but more on creating modular world and also socializing together. So one of the key things for when I see in the future that the games start to not, this is just kind of our prediction for future, that game is not something that I feel that I want to play game. Game might be something that, hey, I would like to invite my friend to this social, to this virtual space. So for example, how do we co-party, co-create things together? How do we socialize together? Maybe one day the Zoom channel, it's not really just, seeing your face and chat. Maybe we have open space that you create. You can have after party or something with other people. So it's a lot more lifestyle entertainment rather than just a segment of gaming. So that's where we see it would kind of evolve and change in the long term.
Okay.
In terms of like market, where people are going with what you said about how we incorporate female or East and West, I do think that the socializing, so a social MMO should be something that everybody can play. It's just a level of how much they engage. So when we build kind of sandbox MMO on starting from mobile, we basically give us the most difficult task. How do we make this more intuitive? How do we make this more easy? How do we make this people can focus on fun creation and socializing? And that opened a lot of doors to massive market for female, but also thinking about the meta game loop and the style of the game should be, I always like to use Nintendo as example. I think Nintendo is a great example that it does leave breathing between East and West, and it's a kind of the stylized and cute and really kind of joyful environment that you're building for that. Yeah. I don't know if I answered your question, but
absolutely. And I mean, but you said a lot of things in there. You talked about socializing, obviously. You talked about creating.
Yeah.
You talked about a more mass market experience, a wider audience, sort of more accessible, which I think is sort of born of maybe that mobile first kind of mentality. So maybe less focus on kind of menus and detailed stats and a little bit more on kind of expressiveness and sort of fluidity of controls. So and you also talked in your previous answer about kind of like the merging of East versus West and the kind of like growing melting pot, right, of gamers. And it's not just more age groups, but it's more nationalities. And there is that kind of convergence happening. But so central to all of that, I think, is really what I hear is this philosophy of yours that games really have the potential to be the predominant digital social space.
Yes.
Do you agree?
I definitely agree on that. And I still think we're very early on that.
Okay. Yeah. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about that. Like why why can a game like Dazzle Rocks be a better social space for Gen Z or the social generation than, say, Facebook?
Well, I think if you look at Facebook, it's a little bit on like it's kind of you're not in the same time, real time, discussing with each other. It's still kind of you show something, people comment, and there's a back and forth.
Yeah, very asynchronous.
So it's kind of back and forth like experience. But what the game offer, especially on a real time MMO space, you can offer real time experience. We always talk about this network effect. So I think if we look at earlier time, a lot of game they said that if you make friends, we give you this chance. If you invite people from Facebook, we give you this gift. But you kind of force the relationship building. But when you are actually in the same social space, building the world together, you have a lot of dynamic between each other. You have a lot of like social dynamic because everybody's individual differently. So what we think is the gaming is going to be more like for Dazzle Rocks, more going to be a social gaming platform. We provide different tools for people to be a better creator, be a better socializer, but how they use this tool, what's the dynamic between them, is making that multiply fun. So we do think the social network, the network effect inside the game is phenomenal. Because there's endless possibility. Let's say some company they're building more, let's say more like RPG type of MMO. The dynamics also different.
Absolutely.
But definitely that in the game sector has a lot more entertaining and lifestyle and how people interact with each other in real time. So I think that's probably one of the reasons that you can see Snapchat is also tackling the game platform and also thinking about how do they gamify their platform because it's much more like entertaining rather than information back and forth.
Okay. And I mean, one benefit of asynchronous, like Facebook, right, is the information can be, because it's centralized, it's maybe a little bit easier to audit. Whether or not they choose to audit it or not is a different question, right? But Facebook clearly has the potential to say, this is misinformation. This is post-truth, right? They can if they want to. And of course, they can do all sorts of redactions and, simply just blocking posts that they've, deemed are hate speech or whatnot. So, I mean, that's not to say that toxicity isn't a problem on Facebook, but of course, how much of a problem it is at least partially based off of corporate decisions. Because from a technology point of view, there's lots of technology in play to sort of help manage asynchronous toxicity. What are your thoughts about some of the challenges of managing toxic behavior in a real-time space? How do you think about that? Like the more real time it is, the more social it is, the more opportunities there are for toxicity to kind of get through.
Yeah, in our game, because our game is quite like intuitive with the hand, so you can use your hand to draw kind of the ground block, kind of decorate the space. So we definitely have the conversation that what if people draw some inappropriate things? I think doesn't matter as async or synchronized type of game, online game and or Facebook kind of this back and forth, you always will face this toxicity. But I think it's more the corporate, like you said, the value of corporation, a lot value of a company So I do think that there's no perfect solution to block everything. But I think as a company, we do take, like, for example, when we choose the features, we ask ourselves right this moment, how much toxicity we can handle. We focus on, so for example, we don't do private chat in the first starting. We do very limited words because we want to make sure that when the feature of social scaling, we also build the tool to actually able to keep up to that. So I think that also goes to the company value, like what does the company believe and what kind of decision they would want to make, because tech is always a simple solution. It's just more about the choice. Yeah.
Okay.
And to sum up with that, it's almost impossible to fix it. But as long as we kind of focus on this, and this is an important thing, and I think eventually this will gradually be fixed. Yeah.
Okay. And MMOs are not necessarily new to gaming. I mean, I grew up playing MMOs. I playing Ultima Online from the beta and EverQuest and all of that sort of stuff. It felt like MMOs sort of had a bit of a heyday, and maybe they faded a little bit. And now maybe they're kind of a bit on an ascension, maybe. There's certainly multiple MMOs in development right now. We talked about another MMO Raf Koster is working on, right? So like, the social MMO is sort of, I guess maybe on the rise. Do you think something happened to make gamers somehow more social today than they were back in the World of Warcraft or Ultima Online days? I guess what I'm wondering is, why is there this trend back towards MMOs and in particular social MMOs? What's happened to suddenly make us think we need to bring MMOs back, even though they were a thing that's sort of slightly faded?
Yeah. It's interesting because when you ask Warcraft or World of Warcraft player, they still think it's a very social game.
Absolutely.
But of course, their core common goal as a team is different. So, for example, a couple of our team, they still have weekly play Warcraft and like playing together. And I think the shift different is, I think the social layers in the MMO is always there. It's just the social part was much more in the lobby and then, kind of around it, not as a center. So I think what it changed is a couple of things changed. So if you think from PC moved to the mobile, there was a kind of growing of how the mobile used to think multiple online and MMO on mobile is impossible. Fortnite make a different theory. The other thing is also what we talked about earlier, the social network have like TikTok and Snapchat, that everything just kind of changed the behavior of how people actually look at the online presence. So
that's interesting.
Yeah. So basically, because Warcraft
so the current batch of MMOs owe something to the rise of the social networks in between World of Warcraft and today. Oh, that's very interesting.
So if you think that Warcraft, people are building a virtual identity, right? And then so Facebook, of course, people have like different identity, but mostly it's about their starting point was a college student having, But if you look at TikTok and everything, it's really about influencer, how people want to build this reputation and this kind of social network. So that really changed how people think. Again, what I want to build is a virtual identity. So I do think that it's just a revolution from device and also the social network and kind of the push to more like a social generation behavior. And that kind of simulate, of course, the current technology, Apple release like new device every year. It really pushed the possibility to do something greater, something more higher end. So I think there's just multiple track from the generation growth and social network and also device enableability to get to that stage.
Obviously. Yeah, and I wonder, is there something also generational? And again, I don't necessarily mean age, but I mean, as you sort of defined it, like social generation, whereby it felt to me like there was a time when people intentionally kept their online persona and their online brand separate from their real life, right? And to me, like, when I think about that, that feels very Instagram-y, right? Like Instagram,
I agree.
You highlight your best life. You know, all your pictures are carefully curated. you're always smiling, you're always, the best angles, you're always sucking in your stomach. And it's like, it's really kind of like a facade of the truth. I mean, this is a generalization, of course. And then there seems to have been some trend towards authenticity, right? We hear that a lot. And the idea that your digital brand, your digital self is more a truthful representation and more closely aligned with your real self. Where I see that manifesting, and I guess this is the question I have for you, is do you agree, and is this relevant for you, is that kids today, like Gen Z, and I know this anecdotally, many of them will happily forego real life things in order to develop their digital self. If you give them $20 and you say you can either buy a junky pair of shoes or you can buy a pair of premium Nike kicks for your, whatever, your hypothetical Dazzle Rocks character, a lot of them might say, yeah, forget those junky dollar store, $20 shoes. That's not a real pair of Nike Air or whatever. I'm going to go for the digital representation. I'm going to develop my digital self at the expense of my physical self. Whereas I think if you go back one generation, right, if you go back to, early millennials, it was probably the other way around. The idea of prioritizing your digital self probably didn't make a lot of sense for a lot of people. So does that statement ring true with you? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely we can see the trend going on that. So for example, that when we actually build this persona for social generation, I actually discuss with our team because we are all represent different culture, different age, different behavior. The way I use Instagram is like a more real-time Pinterest.
Okay.
The way my team, some of them use Instagram, is identity building.
Okay.
The way I use Facebook, they call me like old-fashioned. They are on more Snap and other things. So I do think that they do spend a lot more. I think that also goes to what we were talking about, revolution of the apps. Because, for example, that it used to be you can change filter, but now people would spend tremendous money to change this a color filter for your photo. And then you also add this kind of emoji. You also add more things. So this become the kind of how the social network service that they kind of stimulate this behavior that the social identity is also worth for you to actually invest. Yeah. So that kind of make the game industry have opened up a lot more how we think about the virtual identity. It is true some generation they are of the virtual identity, it's where they build their kind of presence. But some people they actually build a completely different one.
Absolutely.
So in the social kind of the dynamic of that, the beauty of that, you will find different type of a persona.
Yeah.
And that's why.
And your point there is really interesting that it doesn't mean that your digital identity has to mirror your real identity. I think that's a freedom that a lot of people appreciate. And I had a conversation with a guy named Timo who runs Wolf 3D, which is a sort of virtual avatar company.
Yeah, I know the company.
Yeah, and he and I were playing with this and exploring it, and we were talking about how for some people, their virtual identity is a tool to learn things about themselves, right? They learn about their sexual orientation, they learn about their whether they're outgoing or ingoing, are they extroverted, are they introverted? They help. It's like they can role play an identity online and see how it fits, and then basically adopt that identity in real life if it fits properly. And it's in some ways a sort of lower risk way to explore some of these elements of their personality that they haven't quite crystallized.
I really like the terminology, and also of course this is the old game Second Life. I think if everybody have a second chance to do something. It's a very kind of interesting way that you imagine exactly the you, but you tweak a few things, or it's completely different you, or is it something that emotional expression or something? So I do think gaming and also this virtual space provide a lot of opportunity, to build more narrative in your life, build more kind of fun stuff in your life. Yeah.
I just read this interesting article. Someone was breaking down, Ready Player One, right? And kind of like what for them was the most important line in Ready Player One. I'm going to butcher the quote, but the gist of it is, you come to Oasis for who you can be, but you stay for what you can do. That's the gist of it, right? And I feel like that's in some ways a summary of everything that we've just been talking about. Social networks, Facebooks allowed you to play with who you can be, right?
Yeah.
Video games allow you to play with who you want to be. And then there's a significant increase in terms of what you can do.
And actually, if you think from that perspective, the most interesting thing is a game is a living, continual living presence, right? So it's a kind of a persistent presence. What it means is what you can be, what you want to be, it's also being part of dynamic and what happened in the social network. So it's not a static image. You have to go back to edit. It's a kind of growing and living things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The value of the evolution of the persistent world and that feeling that you're shaping it probably is a significant dopamine driver for people. Yes. I would imagine that expectation of like, ooh, I wonder what happened to the seeds that I planted, or the whatever boulder that I created, and then logging in and seeing, oh my God, they turned into trees or whatever. There's probably lots of dopamine hits there, in the same way as getting likes on Facebook and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I can add a funny thing is that our game is kind of a certain feature of communication is during early development, but we see some test player, they find a very interesting way to discuss with each other. Some people was asking how they build certain things that they couldn't figure out. So they were just circling around the things they want to know and then put a question mark. And the other person actually get it. So take this person to where they can buy the blueprints. So I do think that people always find a way.
They find a way.
to communicate. So because I'm actually a bilingual person. So I remember the time when I speak in different language, and I need to observe what they mean to actually do a guessing. So I do think that also work. It's this kind of, like you said, that's persistent and there's dynamic of the player. Yeah.
Can we talk just a second about competition? I get the sense that competition is not necessarily front and center in Dazzle Rocks, although I don't know. I obviously haven't played it. Do you think games can do competition and social really well, or do you have to choose one over the other?
Yeah, I was when I was reading that question, I have this kind of pop up in my mind. I was thinking about Among Us.
Okay.
The reason I thought about it was most people might think it's a competitive game. For me, it's a little bit collaborative and competitive. And this is just my own personal view, but because basically the whole game was actually figure out who is that imposter, right? And the thing is, I can start seeing people when they play, they are doing this profile of the people who is their enemy, who is might be allies. So you almost feel like people are actually, even though it's a competitive game as a result, but the journey of that, it's like sometimes you're my enemy, so sometimes you're my ally. So that kind of vibe, it's quite interesting. If you think from competitive, I do think that right now you will see, I know a couple of studios, they're doing kind of first-person shooter, like team-based and in the open area. And I think Fortnite was actually a good example as well.
Sure.
I do think that space still has a lot of room to grow.
Okay.
For example, that I always talk to our team that maybe in a really long future, if we want to build an MMO, but I don't want to build like a bloody fighting game, let's do something about Splatoon.
Oh yeah.
But then
Splatoon is a great, yeah.
Yeah, Splatoon is a great kind of, because it's both funny and, both very competitive, but in a very relaxing and joyful way. So I do think that space have a lot of room to discover.
Right.
I think the whole, yeah.
No, and I think that's really important. And yeah, you've definitely brought up games that are competitive and yet highly social experiences as well. I mean, I do think there are some people who, might sort of argue that by definition, the intense competition can lead to increased toxic behavior, right? Because your blood's boiling, right? So it might start out social and then kind of devolve into just a cesspool of toxic behavior. I don't know this for a fact, but my guess would be that if you were to track toxicity in Fortnite, you probably have, more friendly discussions in the lobby, right? And then as the intensity of the match ratchets up, right? And as the walls close in, that's probably where you see the increase in would be my guess. And then in the post-match, probably everyone returns to a more sort of civil discourse. I would imagine that there might be some correlation between competition or sort of, the stakes and how civil people are to each other.
Actually, this is a very interesting topic because we actually have an internal conversation about this. So our world is basically you collect resource and then you build kind of modular block. The thing is, the whole world, the resource is also limited and there's time, space. So they're slightly competitive, but it's not a direct, it's not always direct competitive because the reason that we talk about the boundary because the game is more kind of creator focus. So we definitely it's not about the winning condition type of game. But if everything's so harmony, there's no drama.
That's right.
There's no
gotta
little
be some
bit
tension.
It has to be some tension, whether that tension is direct competitive or something, but it has to have different emotion. Otherwise, it's not a invested game from emotion perspective. Yeah.
Cool. And I guess just playing off of that, whatever Fortnite or Call of Duty example. So this is a generalization. I'm going to say it. You can disagree.
Yeah.
My stance is that you don't see too many casual players crossing over into Call of Duty. If you cut your teeth on, whatever, Matchington Mansion or Candy Crush, the transition into, a competitive Call of Duty match might just be too jarring. And so I wouldn't imagine there's a huge crossover there. My question for you is, do you think the opposite is true? Do you think Call of Duty players come to Animal Crossing or hypothetically Dazzle Rocks in larger numbers? Or is it sort of like ne'er the two shall meet? Like either you're casual mass market or you're hardcore and there's always going to be a wall in between.
Well, I always have a theory that if people can be so black and white distinguished, then, it's not too hard to build a game. But my perspective, first of all, I've tried to play Call of Duty with my team. I didn't know how I die. I'm just like, I die, how? And then, but our team was really good. Me. Yeah, someone show. But what's interesting because sometimes our team bring like similar kind of modular house block or casual games that they saw on Discord or Twitch, and I was like, how do you guys get to know this reference again? They said, well, some streamer, they play like very hardcore title. When they take a break, they play something very casual. They play something like Animal Crossing. They play something like Harvest Moon, and like they can cross. But I do think from more massive market, female friendly to cross that hardcore, that's a harder part.
Okay.
Yeah. So I do think that the hardcore game is more leaning toward the definition of a gamer. But I think like the traditional definition of the gamer, but right now it's a bit different. So yeah.
Okay, so I thought it would be fun to maybe sort of close out the conversation about anything specifically about the game you're making, Dazzle Rocks, that you want to talk about. And I'll just highlight that my understanding is that you guys have cross-platform aspirations, which I think is cool. And so, regardless of how you answer this next question, I will then take the conversation into that. Okay. But if there's anything else you want to set up about what Dazzle Rocks is before we talk about the cross-platform, now would be a great time to do that. Sure.
I think I have always been like Animal Crossing player.
Yes.
So when Animal Crossing comes to the console, the latest version, I was a little bit thinking that we're still missing a lot of social. It just always feel Nintendo, they do things well, but they still feel like last generation. So there's something it's missing.
They're socially hesitant for sure.
Yeah, socially hesitant. That's a great word. And also, I was I kind of really intrigued by how Minecraft and Roblox give player a lot of user-generated power. Then we look into the market that we don't see anything that can enable the massive market that can give a lot of creative freedom, not just placement of the house and decorate things, but give a lot of creative freedom for player, but have the social layer. So that's why we have the thesis like the social sandbox for creative community. How do we actually, people can be anywhere, bus and any places, they can actually craft the item and build a world, massive world, and they can chat and also socialize with other people. So basically that's kind of our core vision. What we want to make sure we do is we want to actually illuminate the kind of learning curve. So I mentioned to you that we're targeting mobile, which means the massive market, also a lot more female-friendly opportunity. So we want to make sure that the intuitive experience and people can actually just focus on being creator. And we definitely can see there will be a lot of influencer. There will be a lot of people building their kind of area, but also because the game is highly modular, highly personalized. So you can have, for example, your fox behind or like the lamp you build, you can build a digital version and your own inventory. And that would be a very interesting for people to actually discover different content and also different creation play together. And so our kind of long-term goal is to ensuring that this game will become more social gaming platform. We kind of provide the creator tool, the socializing tool. So not only you can build a highly customized world, you can also build a highly playable world. So anything interactive like you want to place there. So it's more like thinking like Lego, but digital version, simple.
Very cool. And so I'm trying to put myself in that world, trying to imagine myself playing that game. I assume, I can build a thing. Let's say I decide to build a house, or I decide to build a tower, or I decide to build a gigantic statue of a cat. This is an MMO. This is a persistent world. You can come over and say, I want to work on that cat too.
Yes. So basically, you can think about this MMO's open, huge real estate market. There's a lot of land and there's a lot of different places. A player will be given like a free plot, but they can expand, they can move, they can also build an area with other people. Because the world is infinite, so you can also have private island. Like for Finnish people, they like to have a house in the city center, cottage somewhere else. The same concept you can build in a game that I have my own persistent where my close friend visit, but I have an open party area which I build, destroy, and then continue.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. So there's the mosh pit, the free for all, where anyone can come in and contribute, but you can also have your isolated place where the investment you make can't be disrupted by others.
Yes. And
that makes a lot of sense.
there's we actually have one really key term called a co-party mode. So basically, if you think from like a lot of sandbox game, you take weeks and a couple long hours to build the world that you can showcase to people. But co-party mode is actually a place people can build quickly entertainment, hangout area together. And they can socialize and chat and play together in that area. So it can be done in quickly. And then you can invite friends, just drop them the link and they will join the game immediately.
That's cool. Yeah, like almost like deep link into that little node, that little area. Great. Yeah. That's very cool. Very, very smart. Okay, so can we talk for a second about cross-platform?
Yes. I think game is actually moving to not only kind of like this is mobile, this is console. We start seeing a lot of cross-platform. And definitely when we are anchoring the social generation, the behavior also is different. And my social generation that I'm sitting now, I want to reach out the virtual world, or am I just, walking around and then on the street and I want to do something quick. So we definitely want to provide that experience that everybody can access anywhere, anytime. So we start with the mobile, but we will eventually reach out to other platform. Of course, the purpose of that user experience will be different, and also, but the good thing is whatever people create, this kind of virtual market, it's globally shared. It's also very interesting to see how people found different platforms and create different contents.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine that, where you were to eventually launch on PC or something like that, you might see sort of more sophisticated castles being created on PC just because of the nature of the way people play mouse and keyboard and the kind of time investment. I could absolutely see that. Are you thinking about already some of the so in some places I think you're right, like there is this convergence, right? Like the sort of the platform holders continue to maintain their walled gardens, but in some ways it feels like Fortnite kind of smushed those walls a little bit, and the consumers are now sort of adopting a little bit of this post-platform mentality of, well, clearly it's technically possible that I should be able to play where I want, when I want, with whom I want, because I did it on Fortnite. So kind of like, why can't I do that with every game? So in some ways there's convergences, and then in other ways there are still behavioral differences, right? There's still differences, like on mobile, sort of the business model, the in-game shop, the pay to progress or pay to win is maybe a little bit more acceptable, a little bit more ingrained in the culture. On console, there's a little bit more sort of distaste or disdain sometimes towards some of those business models. And when they do free to play, they usually move more towards sort of pure battle pass or purely cosmetic and kind of like no pay to win. I mean, that's an exaggeration. Like obviously some people are mixing and matching, but there is still, I guess, a little bit of broad strokes divide there. So are you already thinking about some of the kind of business challenges that may or may not arise in your cross-platform or post-platform existence?
Well, we currently don't have this kind of golden written answer for it, but a lot of things that you talk about is actually on the table, like we're kind of debating about, because definitely the platform side, they all have different rule. And you know, well, we're really well aware of that. We don't have to go there, but the platform side and also the experience of people and also what their expectation. I do think that the cross-platform strategy is not one-to-one porting, but it's more thinking about the purpose, what player want to be. So we do talk about the social gaming platform. So in our game, that in the mobile space, maybe the experience much more like a party mode that you quick in. But then there will be a lot of different, more PC, more you're sitting down, kind of building experience, but you spend a lot more time. Let's say if you and I, we build like a huge amusement park, we probably party on the mobile phone, but we probably build it, this one. So
On PC.
I do think that there will be a mapping about what's our core of our game, because our is a social sandbox. So social and sandbox is very important thesis to us. So how do we look at other platform to serve the need for that?
Excellent.
Yeah.
And I'll just note that we went 1 hour talking about social, persistent world, MMO, avatar, digital representation, video games. And not once did we say the word metaverse. Pretty impressive.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting topic, because when Galaxy investing us, they also say the same thing. Like at the end of our presentation, they're like, "Oh, you're the only company that said about metaverse." And I was I was actually thinking when we actually I learned much more what people think about metaverse when this word become popular. I think before we only want to do kind of a creator space that people can actually socializing there, and I think too often we spend too much time having this terminology, and that kind of limited how we think about things. So
no, I think it's great that you have an identity, you have a vision, and whether or not the metaverse label is applied to it is secondary. There is a concept, there is an idea, there are trends that existed outside of the current hotness of metaverse. And absolutely, you could say you are building something metaverse-y, but it doesn't need it. It's fascinating on its own, right?
Actually, in February, we did a workshop. So that workshop, we have many different topics about like just kind of talking to our team where we come to this vision. And there's one exercise I said that, what's your impression of metaverse? And they cannot describe with words, they need to drop picture. And you can totally tell. And so at the end, the team was looking for one answer from me. What's definition of metaverse? I was like, we don't know.
There we go. That seems like a pretty good answer.
Yeah, but the thing is, everything you post here, it's definition of metaverse. It's about what it's actually important for us, and it's more about how we create this virtual space for people that bring people together, entertaining together. I think that's kind of the baseline of the
Wonderful. Well, that is a perfect closure.
Thank you,
Stella. Thank you so much for being on today. Again, you've been very generous and open about what you're building. I learned some stuff, and clearly, I've been following what you guys are doing for 6 to 9 months now. So it was very exciting for me to hear all of this stuff. Yeah. I wish you and your team all the success in the world. I think you're building something really exciting. And again, thank you for being on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, and also really appreciate you made the conversation so delightful.
Delightful.
Thank you.
I'll change the name of the podcast. Delightful Conversations about Video Games with Ben Mattis.
It's a very soulful conversation. I really like it. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks,
have a nice
Stella.
day. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
And that's it for another episode of the Tomorrow with Rovio podcast. Thank you, Stella, for your time. Thanks for your generosity, sharing your insight and the wisdom and everything you and your team have accrued and learned over the last 5 years working on these exciting projects. I hope you, the listener, enjoyed this episode. If you did, please don't hesitate to share it with a friend. That's why we do it. We do it so people like you can maybe learn some stuff like us. If you have interest in this kind of thing, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me in all sorts of places. I'm not hard to find. I'd love to hear from you. What do you think of the episode? What do you think about the guests we've had? Any thoughts about future guests? Any thoughts about future themes or trends you'd like us to explore? That kind of feedback makes this project all the more worthwhile. So I appreciate that feedback greatly. That's it. Have a wonderful day, and until next time, bye.